Dr. Weiskel, a very warm welcome and a good morning. And I think it's too early for you, but thanks for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you with us.
Oh my goodness, thank you so very much. It's a really an honor to be here, and I want to apologize right off for getting the time wrong, but that half an hour misstep. But I'm here now 100%, and it's not too early by any means. Anyone who does field work in marine ecology, you know, oftentimes you have to get up really early to meet the tide. So I'm very used to it, but it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you. And let's jump right in. I have a fair bit to say, but I'm aware that we're starting late. So I'll try to hurry it along so that we have time for questions at the end. So I'm assuming that I can share my screen here. Let's see. And let me just do that. Does that work? Is that in the proper presentation mode?
Yes, we can see it.
Great, okay. So I'm here to talk with you all today about what I understand to be a fragile moment for marine conservation around the world. And I do want to give you a very quick, just a background about where I work, the Environmental Law Alliance Worldwide. So as Anand said, I work with environmental lawyers around the world, a group of about 400 of them in a pretty strong network. And I'm one of the scientists on the team, one of 6. And we do everything that we can to further their work. So their lawsuits or their investigations or the work that they are doing to protect local communities and to work with on the side of public interest. So, so we don't work with governments and we don't work with corporations. So within the science program, you can see there, so a shout out to the day that I met, or the week that I met Nirmal, who invited me to do this talk initially. Thank you, Nirmal. So this is a photo from the Western Ghats in 2012. Can't believe it was 10 years ago. And so what we do in the science program is we sort of do these technical reviews. So we review environmental impact assessments, and we sort of help our colleagues understand what the implications are for different projects. You know, what could the impacts be? And then we go into court and we serve as expert witnesses. And then we provide professional training. So we help communities understand how they can review EIAs, because oftentimes, as many of you probably know, environmental impact assessments can be quite lengthy and really heady to get through. And so we sort of help communities understand how to home in on the important details. And then we sometimes go out in the field still, which is great, and do our own collection, or we work with our partners to help them collect the environmental data that they need to then bring to court. So very quick overview. So for today, what I really want to talk about are 2 different things. One is this idea that I believe as marine conservationists that we need to be challenging the status quo that's out there. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm seeing as this trend of fatalism about the future. And then a little bit about this sort of blue craze, blue economy, all of the blues that we've been hearing about in our work. And then I want to talk about 2 victories in India that we're happy to report out. Okay, so let's jump into it. So this is something I just want us to kind of keep in mind as we're going through this, which is I really want us to be thinking about how we can change the paradigm. So we are in the midst of climate change. There is a rise of authoritarian government organizations around the world, and there is increased pressure on our ocean resources. So how can we, as conservation scientists, interweave those rights of coastal communities with the rights of nature into a new and effective framework? And so that's sort of my my perspective as I'm going into this work, is how can we push the paradigm in a new way? But let's see, no, I'm not advancing my slides. There we go. So the first example of fatalism that we've been working on recently is this sort of this example of the Maldives. And many of you are probably familiar with the Maldives, not that far away from India, and a really interesting country in that it's just made up of more than 1,000 coral islands. And the highest elevation is only 2.4 meters above sea level, 500,000 people. And I'm going to focus in for this example on the Odiyur Atoll, which is in the farther, the southern part of the country, and there's 10,000 people that live there. And we're trying to challenge this project, which is all about reclaiming 236.5 hectares of land in Adu City. And the idea is to sort of promote all this other development. And so there's all this justification that's gone into the environmental impact assessment and all of these different reasons that they need more land. And you can imagine, because you saw the photo of the Maldives, and if you know the sea level rise that's going to occur, like we know that we need to sort of do everything we can to protect as much land as possible, and also protect the ecosystems that are in that are part of these atolls and part of the country. So then the question becomes, like, is this really a good use of, you know, this land to go into this atoll and essentially fill all of the coral reefs in, fill all of the seagrass areas in, and create land for, in large part, resorts. And so you can see here, this is like a snapshot of what they're hoping to sort of produce in terms of future tourist destinations. And we looked at the impacts, but we didn't have to look very hard because the environmental impact assessment actually laid out all these different impacts. And so we know it's, you know, going to affect 42%, almost half of the lagoon. We know that the sediments will be there long enough to destroy most species. And we know that there's a high estimated value in damages. So this is not something that is sort of, you know, they're hiding in, contrary to most of the environmental impact assessments that we've reviewed or that we typically review. This one is sort of out in front, like, yes, this is going to be a terrible project for the marine ecology of the area and for the stability of marine ecosystems. And yet there's this sense that sort of, okay, we're going to be underwater anyway, so let's just build a resort and get our 20 years of, you know, finances, or 20 years of revenue from that. And in fact, we might even be able to use international resilience funding to build this, what we would deem unsustainable development. So there's this, again, this idea of sort of this fatalism, like, we're going to be underwater, it's not going to matter, so we might as well just take advantage in the moment, even though this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, even though there's this spectacular marine ecological system, which you can see here in the photo. So it's an interesting example of sort of, yeah, maybe we don't care. And that, as a conservationist, as a scientist, as a marine ecologist, that is very hard to counter. You know, it's what you're doing is trying to counter these economic arguments and this kind of almost like a nihilistic approach to about the future. So I need suggestions from all of you, fellow marine conservationists, to help me think about how to push back against these kinds of arguments. We do have a citizen lawsuit that we're supporting in the country with our partners. India, actually, the XIM Bank is heavily financing this project, which is interesting, direct connection to India. But despite the lawsuit and despite everything that we've done in the courtroom, that we know that the president's going to sign, or he already did. And so this project is going forward. So again, a call for help in terms of developing stronger arguments that we can use to counter this kind of status quo, here we go approach. My second example in this fatalism section of the talk is from the country of Antigua and Barbuda, which is in the far eastern part of the Caribbean. And Barbuda was hit by Hurricane Irma in 2017. And you can see here, we're going to the southern part of the country. And you can see that just after the hurricane, there was So much had been wiped away. The vegetation was destroyed, and there was so many of the buildings, all the resorts had been washed away, and there was this clear indication that Barbuda's in the line of future hurricanes, and we know that hurricanes are getting stronger and getting more frequent. And all the literature is suggesting that we might want to reconsider developing along the coast. But that hasn't happened. So this is a Google Earth image from 2020 showing that what's in fact happening is that development is coming right back. And interestingly, in the executive summary of their project report, which I analyzed, they actually say, okay, we know sea level rise is happening. We looked at these different scenarios, but we also know that the standard timeline horizon for developments is 40 to 50 years, and there are many studies out there that account for the major Arctic ice melt, and they forecast this 1.5 meter rise. But we consider that scenario to be a global catastrophe. So, and it can't be mitigated by this development, so we're not going to consider it in the analysis. And so again, the same thing, we're running into these scenarios where the project proponents are taking themselves out of accountability completely. They're not asking, they're not even considering what their project might do, or how it might be affected. And so the idea that sea level rise could be mitigated by development is a bit absurd anyway. But certainly you could reconsider developing on that very fragile peninsula that you saw on the map. And of course, there are spectacular coral reefs on either side of that peninsula, and really important seagrass beds, and all of which I don't need to go into the details of why those ecosystems are so important, and the ecosystem services that they provide, but and the local communities and fishers that they support. We'll assume that we all agree that that is worth protecting, but these proponents of these projects are getting away with saying essentially we don't have to consider them. So again, my flag, of help, of needing help to figure out how to counter some of these arguments. So the second aspect of what I want to talk about today, the second part of this sort of status quo theme, is this idea of the blue economy. So I think when we first started thinking about the blue economy, there were these strong assumptions that the wishes of coastal communities around the world would be prioritized and protected. At the same time, there was an assumption that the ocean could be exploited to a greater extent than it currently is, despite climate change and other stressors that we're aware of. And so these two assumptions are, I would argue, are in opposition with each other. And so what we're finding is that this idea of the blue economy is really just a pivot, status quo. We don't analyze how we're doing development, or how we're using resources, or how we're consulting with communities, or how we're elevating the important voices of people in the most vulnerable situations and the most dependent situations. I don't think we're doing that analysis. I think we've done a pivot offshore to see what's there that we can now exploit. And this is a long quote, which I'm not going to read for you now, but the idea is that it's all about sort of the business of the world economy. And so the way that the European Commission describes the blue economy includes extraction of oil and gas. It includes all of this, shipping. It includes extractive fishing, even, and all kinds of aquaculture. And so it includes, and this is just an example I took from Norway, which is absolutely focused on assets, income, value added. So this idea that it's a real monetization of the ocean, rather than an opportunity for us to think about protection first, and sustainable use second. So one last slide to sort of highlight all of this. Just this idea that the blue economy is going to, somehow magically, we haven't really figured out the details of how, but it's going to increase fish stocks. It's going to improve fisheries. It's going to create better jobs. We're going to be able to develop a whole system of blue carbon because we're going to protect these specific habitats. Even though we're going to be increasing aquaculture, we're going to be increasing more kind of attention or sort of migration to the coast because it'll be cleaner, be more attractive, more people will want to live there. So this is a slide sort of showing about this importance of blue food, right? So this is an interesting infographic, I thought, because suddenly in the year 2020, 2021, 2022, we are talking about aquatic foods as the world's forgotten superfood. I would argue that fishing has been around for a long time, that seafood's been around for a long time. It's not something new, but it's being promoted and it's being sort of marketed as, again, this pivot and with exploitation and extraction at its base. We can't do that. So this is a very simple model from Rashid Sumaila at University of British Columbia, who just talks about this idea that we have this model that we have the marine environment and we have all these things we want to extract, including primarily fishing, but all these resources that we want to extract from the ocean. And all we do is put like the worst stuff back in. So we put all of we dump all of our mining waste, we dump sewage. Now we know we are putting plastic everywhere in the ocean. There's all this effort now to sequester more carbon and to somehow, sort of potentially disrupt the whole ocean carbon pump. That is not sustainable, I would argue. And so this status quo of kind of using the ocean and assuming it's going to be there for us in perpetuity is dangerously inaccurate. And again, I call upon all of you to help think about how we can work towards changing this paradigm, because I think we're racing in this kind of dual fatalistic and sort of weirdly optimistic, like we can just do things as we've always done them and it will be okay. I think we're racing towards pretty catastrophic destruction, not to put too fine a point on it, but so that's sort of the big picture trends that I'm seeing as a marine ecologist in this legal world. And I will say that what really brings a lot of sort of keeps me getting up in the morning and doing the work that I do and really loving the work that I do is that I get to work with extraordinary partners around the world who are thinking deeply about how to counteract these trends. And so, oh yeah, this was just a last slide about blue justice, even that we're thinking about blue justice, which is important, but also problematic. But maybe we might get back to that. So let's talk about these two victories in India. So this actually is from a little bit ago. This is back in 2014. And we were working with partners in Tamil Nadu, and we were working on this, the Chayur Ultra Mega Power Project, which was going to be built in this village that was near the Odiyur Lagoon, and it was going to be built on a beach that in the environmental impact assessment was supposed to be vacant and unused. And so together with our partners here, we looked through, we reviewed the EIA, and I traveled to the region and spoke with the plaintiffs in the lawsuit. And together we realized that we knew how much this massive coal-fired power plant would affect the community, would affect the local fishers, would affect everybody in terms of air emissions, in terms of, all of the different impacts. They would have had to put in roads, a new jetty to receive. It was all going to be imported coal. So there was going to be this jetty that would need to be constructed. Then there would be the coal ash from the waste product from using the coal-fired power plant, from running it. And then there would be all of the dust from the coal being transported off the boats. And so, and there would be all this other ancillary infrastructure and roads, and the region was definitely not ready for that, and it would have had a profound negative impact on everybody. And what was specifically frustrating to me and our partners was that, as I said, the beach where they were going to construct the jetty and where there was going to be a tremendous amount of industrial traffic, essentially, and where eventually they were going to build the coal-fired power plant, was said to be empty and unused. And so we traveled there, and it did, saw that was obviously untrue, which is a fairly big error to make in an environmental impact assessment. And so we highlighted that, and then we worked with our partners. So essentially, what's required in a good environmental impact assessment is that you, within India, you would have to look at the coastal zone management plan. You'd have to adhere to the CRZ guidelines. You would have to look at whether or not there was existing use of the coast and the ocean commons by fisher folk. Then you would have to ensure that there was a long-term plan for the coastal land use, and you'd also have to present some kind of long-term housing plan to compensate the fishing community that would be affected. But that didn't happen. As I said, there was an inaccurate map that was included in the environmental impact assessment. The map was also not in the right language, so it was just in Hindi and English. It wasn't in Tamil, so that the local community couldn't review the project as effectively. And there was no map of customary use of ocean resources, and there was definitely no housing plan. And so our colleagues decided to write a paper about this, and to do the work of articulating in a kind of quantitative, semi-academic way what we all could see was true from anecdotally and from visiting the area. And so one of the proponents, one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, was from one of the fishing villages that would have been directly affected. And he, I'm not using anybody's names just out of respect for the importance of keeping our partners safe. And when I checked in with all of them, they requested that I focus on the project and not on them. So, but this particular partner ended up teaching himself GIS, and then being able to, he sort of articulated all the different seasonal uses of the beach. And so I just pulled out this quote from the paper, talking about the shore seining, and they use these direct quotes. It's a really old tradition in our community. It involves not less than 30 fishermen at a time. It encourages the concept of collective fishing, and it's one of the main reasons for unity in our community. So we use it, but we use it only during the months of January to March. And it's used to catch all kinds of fish. So the idea being that if you don't collect these kinds of data, you do not understand what's happening in an area. And so we were able to make, I say we, but it's really our partners, were able to make this argument very effectively. And so right now, for all of those reasons, the sort of the weakness of the EIA, the strength of the data that our partners were able to produce, and frankly, some economic issues, the economic sort of situation, which has worked in our favor, we've been able to kind of keep this project from going forward. So right now, the idea of importing coal is not attractive. And then there was a much greater land requirement for the ash dike. That's where all of the ash disposal would have gone. The pond would have had to have been located. It was a huge land use. And so that was a strike against it. And it sort of, the proponents realized that the finances are not going to work to pursue this project. And in 2019, we got a good review from the expert appraisal committee, and they suggested that or determined that a new EIA would need to be done because this one was so inadequate, and that hasn't happened yet. So fingers crossed. As we know, those of us who work in the legal field, every victory is temporary, and every defeat feels permanent. But we're going with this one. So pleased to be able to report this out as there's no power plant there yet. And the second victory that I want to talk about is more recent, also an interim victory. But this was 2 fishing harbors that were proposed in the Callow Valley estuary, part of the estuary. You can see the 2 villages here in this Google Earth image. And this was a problematic project for many reasons. I think starting with the fact that the justification for the project was really, was really inadequate. So the idea for putting in not 1, but 2 fishing harbors into this area was to facilitate increased traffic from offshore fishing vessels. So it had nothing to do with helping the local fishers who were fishing in the estuary or who were fishing just offshore. It had quite a bit to do with fishing vessels that were coming in, that were fishing in deeper waters. And so does that benefit the local community? Does that benefit the local ecosystems? Our partners felt strongly that the answer was no. And there were some other issues with this project as well. One of them being that the proponents did a fairly poor job of articulating or sort of describing the dynamism in the coastal ecosystem. So you can see here, there's a black arrow there behind the circle, that in this image, the sea, the shoreline is unbroken, and looks like a sandbar that's going to be there forever. But we know that that's not true. And actually, this image comes from their rapid EIA report. So they know full well that there's this real dynamism in the system, and that the sandbar breaks. That's typical with many estuarine systems. But what they were proposing to do in their project was to put in these permanent jetties, and you can see them there in the yellow bars. And so they were going to have this permanent opening into the estuary, which all of you who are estuarine ecologists, marine ecologists would know that would have a tremendous impact on all of the sort of all of the species that are in the estuary. So they rely on particular salinity, particular temperatures, and that all those regimes would have been disrupted severely. So we were able to point out these shortcomings. We also highlighted the fact that there were sort of some terrestrial impacts that hadn't been considered. So you think about bringing in these 2 villages, that's going to mean more roads, that's going to mean increased pollution, that's going to mean all kinds of ancillary impacts. And so we highlighted all of that. But I will say that the primary reason for this project being successfully halted, at least at present, was really the impact on the olive ridley sea turtles. And so our partner is a tremendous hero, personal hero of mine. And he just said, look, we're just going to go to the site and we're going to see what's happening. First of all, they found that construction was already happening. That's not legal. But they also were able to successfully document active use by sea turtles. So you can see the tracks in the left-hand photo. There's a carcass in the right-hand photo. And the idea was to show to the court, basically, that this is, you cannot have a fishing harbor that affects sea turtle nests, and this directly will. And you can see it already is with the construction right there on the beach. So the status of that case is that the site visit to document the site value, the biodiversity, the turtle nests, and in fact, inadvertently to document the illegal construction was successful. And then the judge issued an interim order to halt construction. And thus far, the proponents have respected that ruling. So again, interim victory, we cross our fingers. And we at ELAW are standing by ready to jump in and help our partners in the next stage or the next step, whenever that is. So I think that's it. We did a race through, and now I'll be delighted to take any questions. So let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Dr. Weiskel. Really very interesting and enlightening talk for all of us. And certainly the examples that you gave on the various development activities happening around the globe and how they are impacting marine conservation issues and creating problems for marine conservation in countries like Maldives and Barbuda, and then also in our own country in India. It's really great. And thank you for pointing out the perils of monetizing coastal resources, only looking at blue economy as from the point of monetizing it. So definitely an eye-opener. Thank you very much. And to our audience, you can ask questions to Dr. Weiskel by typing in the chat box, or if you want to ask the questions directly, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Thank you. No questions so far, but I think I think we'll have some questions. Some people. Anyone? Any questions that you have? Okay, I'll begin with one question which I had in my mind before you started to talk, actually. So when I looked at the title for today's talk about the fragile moment for marine conservation. So what I feel is like, for when we look at how the development activities are being regulated or being discussed around the world, we think from the lenses of SDGs or the global targets, the global biodiversity targets or the sustainable development goals. We look at these problems from that lens. So sometimes answering even local questions, sometimes these goals help us. But do you think that it is also important for us to think about national targets or global local targets, where we can focus on the local issues from a very holistic point of view, considering the local resources, local ideas actually? So what are your views on this actually? How to deal with problems thinking about from a local viewpoint?
It's a great question. I gave a talk recently to a US audience actually, and they asked me to sort of frame everything through the Sustainable Development Goals, and because it was of importance to them, because all of their work was sort of, they were going to pursue certain projects if they adhered to those goals. And I understood what they were doing, and I think a lot of the answer, a lot of my answer would sort of say, I mean, it really depends on the audience. So I think for some people, if they're going to talk to the United Nations, for example, or they're in a situation where, you know, they're arguing on behalf of a certain kind of, you know, I don't know, a pot of money that they can get if they sort of say, like, you know, we're focused on, you know, this is going to directly enhance, you know, Sustainable Development Goal 14, right? Life below sea. So, or life below water. So I think, you know, it can be useful to have that framing, that international framing. I find that the way that ELAW works, which is very local most times, is really effective. And I think that that's true for two reasons. One, we've noticed that the top-down effect, you know, the top-down sort of global treaties and the sort of focus on, you know, this is the way we're going to run this economy, or this is the way we're going to do things, or this is a policy that's going to apply to everyone. I think we've noticed that, you know, that the sort of antithesis to the grassroots approach hasn't helped us protect marine resources or coastal communities. And the only places where I've seen true protection and true sort of authentic interaction and engagement, and that's a strong statement, I want to be a little bit careful, but the places where I've seen that be most effective are when it comes from a truly authentic grassroots initiative. And so I think in that context, those sort of international mechanisms become less important, because it's really about the local relationships that you have. It's about the trust that you develop. It's about the long-term commitment to staying engaged and listening and bringing resources and thinking about, you know, sort of what's replicable. If we have a case study or something that's worked really well here, can we inspire others to do the same thing elsewhere? And so I think I've come around to being, I used to work in international law and thought I was going to have a whole career actually as an international environmental lawyer. The year, that was a different chapter of my life, but I have come to believe exactly the opposite, which is that if we're able to sort of make changes at that smaller scale, that individual or community or project level, that is the way in this context that we're working in to be most effective. So I really encourage people to push back against that. That's a personal view. It's not an ELAW view, but it certainly has been true to my experience.
Sure, truly insightful, Dr. Weiskel. We have a couple of questions for you in the chat box now. So D. Raw is asking that blue economy is being portrayed as a loophole. However, if the blue economy does not boost, we will have no youth in coastal parts. Okay, I think I have not understood this question very well, but basically, correct me if I'm wrong, D. Raw, but I think D. Raw is asking if blue economy is being portrayed as a bad aspect of development along coastal resources, coastal areas, and how do we bridge this understanding of blue economy as bad for the coastal conservation or coastal areas? Like, I think that is what D-Raw means here, if I'm not misunderstood.
So yeah, I mean, I'm hesitant to say sort of bad or good, but I think that we need to be careful not to delude ourselves into thinking that somehow we're doing something in a different way, or that we're that by sort of focusing on the blue economy. And you'll notice that in the literature and in the UN speak and in all the conferences and a lot of the NGO communities, that there's this, as soon as you say blue economy, you say sustainable. It's like there's no way that you're going to have anything that's unsustainable, because we can't fathom that idea. We're all on board with this idea that if we sort of pivot to the ocean, it's going to be better. And I think we just haven't done the work to actually change our own behavior. And so that's my thesis, is that we're sort of running with the status quo. And that's problematic because we've seen what happens on land when we've done that, and the sort of inequities that it creates, and the stolen resources and the complete destruction. And so we have an opportunity to do something different in the ocean, and everybody wants to. I don't want to sort of say that people who are strong blue economy proponents are not saying let's go and destroy the ocean. Nobody's saying that. But there's for me, a perplexing assumption that somehow by saying that it's sustainable, that it will be. But we haven't done the work to figure out what that means and how to do things differently. I don't know if that answers the question, but
I think D-Raw wants to, Deepika Rawal, she will ask the question herself later. So I have a question. Now we have a question from Shayantan Das. He's asking, how effective has the concept of natural capital, that is economic valuation of natural resources, been in supporting legal arguments in opposition to unplanned construction in developed and developing nations?
That's also a really good question. I have had the embarrassing experience of thinking that I could make a pretty strong natural capital argument. Again, at the local level, I was working in the Yucatan Peninsula, and I was giving a talk to a bunch of lawyers on the sort of business development side. And I was talking to them about the real importance of protecting mangroves. These were all lawyers who were interested in particularly in sort of resort development. So they were valuing very specifically mangrove resources. And they had, it turns out, all of the data to show the value in terms of natural capital for keeping those mangroves. And so I went through, they were very polite, and it was a very civil interaction. And I went through my whole talk, and I went through all of the valuations and the reasons, the economic reasons and the social reasons and everything. And I gave my full natural capital speech. And then they said, that's fine, we'll just buy the mangroves. We can afford to do that. And we'll just pay to, kind of if it's a question of economics, then we're prepared to bargain, because we see the value of the resort for us personally as being higher. And so that was a really important, it was a very humbling moment for me as an ecologist, because I never think that people are not going to see the value of ecology once I explain it. And I realized that there are arguments on the other side of the natural capital argument that there's just no way to kind of bridge those two. At least I haven't found it. So major kudos and support for people who have been able to use natural capital effectively. I find that if a proponent is ready to run with a project, that the natural capital argument doesn't work as well as we want it to, unfortunately. But again, give me examples where that's wrong. I would be pleased to be wrong.
Oh, we have Aaron who wants to ask a question directly to you, Heidi. And we have unmuted you. Yes.
Oh, I still don't hear Aaron though, actually.
You're on mute. We can't hear you, Aaron.
I'm still not hearing you. It's great to see you. Now you're definitely muted. No.
We have, yeah. I think there's some issue, and we can't hear you actually. Yeah.
You can't, but put it in the chat, and or we can connect on WhatsApp.
Please put it.
Thank you for coming to the talk.
Okay, we have, by the time Aaron puts in his question in the chat box, we have a question from Shama. She asks, how would you deal with a situation where the projects benefit the communities where they're interested in it, and it also ends up causing some destruction to the ecosystem? Asking this in reference to Indian fishing communities, which are not doing too well economically. How to draw this fine balance?
It's such a thoughtful question. And I mean, the easy answer for me is that ELAW is a demand-driven organization. So whatever our partners are hearing on the ground and understand to be the right thing to do in that situation, or if they are coming in and saying, this development, we're not going to stop it, or we're actually in favor of it, we want it to be done in this way that's going to be as, you know, as sort of minimal in terms of its footprint as possible. But we are gonna, you know, we're not gonna stand up and say anything against it. We fully were on board with that. ELAW doesn't take positions. All we do is support with research and with court appearances, whatever our partners want. So there definitely have been many cases, actually, not specifically around fishing harbors or fishing communities in India, but there definitely have been cases in my lifetime at ELAW where our project partners have said 100% this project is we're supporting it. Maybe it's a bit controversial, but with this slang we want to support. In fact, one example I can give you actually is an example where a partner has chosen not to, this is really controversial, but not in India, where a partner has chosen to support the local community's desire to be able to collect sachets, like, or the tiny, like, sort of containers, whatever plastic containers that people use for condiments and shampoo, etc. The community has wanted to be able to collect those because it's a financial resource for them, and then those are used in an incinerator. And so on the plastic, sort of break free from plastic side of things, and the, you know, sort of big picture thoughts about community health and moving forward and pushing back against the fossil fuel industry, everyone says, absolutely not, we should not be doing this. We don't want to encourage the burning of plastic. That just seems like a nihilistic idea. But in this case, our partner has said, this is really, really, really critical for this community. And right now, this is a stepping stone for them. And we're not going to oppose this this project going forward. And we've given all the arguments why it's dangerous to be burning plastic, and our partner has said we're going to continue to support it. So in cases like that, there's no way that we wouldn't support our partner. So it definitely does happen, and I think it's really important not to have a sort of anti-development or sort of pro forma kind of predetermined response. There are many kinds of projects that do need to go forward, and there are ways to do them that support local communities, and particularly when the communities are saying, hey, we really want this. That's paramount for us. That's critical to listen. So yeah, it's a really thoughtful question. Thank you.
I think Shyama has a follow-up question to that. Yes, Shyama, please.
Yeah, thanks, Heidi. That was quite insightful. And I guess, that's the way to do it, to not go with predetermined notions. I'm a lawyer myself. And so I just wanted to ask you about the legal system, and that is the judiciary system. As you have done these court cases in different jurisdictions, do you notice any difference in the approaches? Are there any good examples of judiciaries in different jurisdictions? One. Second question is about, these are the local courts, and then is there any way to approach international courts, or do you think that's a futile effort when it comes to such projects? Yeah, so these are my two questions.
So speaking broadly, I would say that we're generally a big fan of India's National Green Tribunal. That's pretty unusual, and in many cases, the justices sitting on the various benches have delivered really important and insightful and really forward-thinking judgments. There have been some exceptions to that as well, but I think the idea of having a National Green Tribunal is really amazing. I'm not sure it would work in every country, but it's really cool that India has it. So I'm grateful to all of the forward-thinking and well-informed justices who sit on those benches. Internationally, yes, definitely there are some fora that I think are more valuable than others. We've had really good luck with the Inter-American Court for Human Rights, and we have partners who have brought cases from Mexico and from Honduras, and from Nicaragua, and they've gotten really good rulings that allow them to then go back and at the government level, at the national level, really pressure their governments to say, we now have a ruling saying that that you need to, in one example, clean up this river that's been making hundreds of or thousands of people sick. And in another case, there was some financial compensation that was offered as a result. So the international fora, it's a strategic, you know this as a lawyer better than I do. There's a kind of, there are optics to going to court, right? And so sometimes in those international fora, what you're doing is sort of raising the flag of the government misbehaving. And the government sometimes can respond in the way that you want them to that kind of pressure, because they don't want to be seen as sort of having, overlooked human rights in their country or done something that was grossly unjust. So it can have an effect depending on the forum and depending on the issue. Yeah.
I think Aaron's back with us, and he wants to ask the question. Just Aaron, you can ask the question now. Okay, I think there's some issue. Aaron, can you hear us? If you are there, please ask the question. Okay, it's not working. No problem. We have, I think, Gaurav, who wants to ask a question to Dr. Weiskel. Gaurav, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Weiskel, for such an insightful talk. I mean, it was really interesting, especially for a young person like me who is also aspiring to become a nature conservationist. And my question to you is, because you have worked on so many projects in India as well as abroad, I would love to know from you and from your experience that what are some of the skill sets that young conservationists should aspire to foster?
I love hearing that that's the direction you're headed in for your life. That's wonderful. So encouraging and exciting. It's a great career path, and others on this call, I'm sure, will echo that. So you need to know what you're doing. As a scientist, you need to know what you're doing in the field. So you need to be able to understand, whatever the particular area is of your expertise, whether, you become a zoologist and you're very knowledgeable about a certain taxa, or you're aware of sort of oceanographic processes, or whatever it is. You need to kind of know your science. And then I think it's also useful for me. It's been very useful to, as you say, like to sort of work in many different fora. So to sort of work directly with lawyers and understand just really different concepts, like the idea of sort of, certainty in the legal sense is very different than the idea of certainty in the ecological sense. As scientists, we never want to say anything is, 100%. But as lawyers, like, you need to know, okay, is this going to happen or is this not going to happen? And so there's this really different understanding. And I remember when I was being trained as a expert witness, that the lawyers who were training me said, you just need to be aware that there are good facts and bad facts. And it was such a bizarre concept to me, because obviously as scientists, we don't have good facts and bad facts. And so, we take into account all the evidence, the preponderance of the evidence, and then we, sort of look at the data, and then we figure out, we draw the conclusions that we feel comfortable drawing. And I think that leads me to my next sort of comment, which is that it's really important that you not step outside of what you're good at and step outside of what you can do. A lot of what you're doing as a scientist in this conservation world is maintaining, you need to maintain your own credibility. And if you sort of start to jump out and say, sure, I'm a marine ecologist, but I know a ton about snakes, you can get yourself into trouble real quickly. And then people say, gosh, does this person really know what she's talking about? And then not only does your argument or your reputation fall apart, but you could be jeopardizing anything that you're trying to put forward. So it's really important that you sort of, really understand your information, and then you understand what the limits are of your information, and that you're, and then I would say the third thing is, it's really, scientists have this funny reputation for being introverts or not being sort of good communicators, or I don't know, but it's to the extent that you can develop your own network of people and your own sort of network of experiences. I think that's really valuable as well. Helping, being able to communicate effectively in writing, orally, whether or not you choose to sort of have a public identity and show up in the media, or whether or not you sort of choose to step back from that and publish in the literature. I mean, there are many ways to be a conservationist, but be aware of what you're doing, so that you're cultivating, a reputation that has credibility and that has longevity, and you need your people along the way to sort of to reflect that back. So the more that you can sort of be out there and talking to people and developing your network, the more that that other people will say, oh yeah, I know. I know you, I've seen your work, and I trust that you're going to give us the right information, that you're not going to hide things or be misleading or sort of disingenuous about who you're working with, or where you stand on certain issues. So I'd say there's sort of soft skills and hard skills. You want all the scientific hard skills, and then you want all the sort of soft human skills, which is a big bag, but you don't have to do it all today.
That's really valuable advice for, I think, most of the participants here, and I think we'll take this away as the crux of the talk as well. Like, how to build upon our strengths and how to work on our strengths to the best for the benefit of our work as well as for the benefit of the entire world. I think Aaron has put in the question, and I'll ask this question, and this will be the last question. Sorry, Dr. Heidi. This is Aaron is asking, traditional communities are taking the brunt for both rapacious development and in many cases conservation intervention, that is developing MPAs or fisheries bans, etc. And the latter particularly in the global south. So we have this in our own country, examples from our own country. Securing rights of these communities in the land and sea is particularly important from the South Asian context, in a way safeguarding them from both mega projects or strict conservation measures. Do you have examples of such initiatives that have worked and have been mainstreamed by the government?
What was the last part? And been what by the government?
The examples of these kind of initiatives where there is a safeguarding from both mega conservation projects as well as there are strict conservation measures which are happening, mega development projects and conservation measures which are happening at the same time. And do you have such kind of initiatives where these initiatives have worked and also been mainstreamed by the government, so also being pushed by the government?
Mainstream by the government, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, oh, Aaron's adding something extra here. Oh yeah, okay. Oh, got it, okay. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, definitely. So we do have good examples. It's interesting. We just had a big meeting yesterday among our partners at ELAW about this relatively new concept of marine justice. What does that mean? Actually, I've referred to it in my talk as blue justice, but this idea that, sort of how do we genuinely listen to communities and their needs. And it's with this huge international push now, this 30 by 30 sort of, let's, sort of wall off these particular areas, maybe not taking into consideration historical uses or historical engagement or even ownership or access. And, it's easy in a way for the governments to get on board with those kinds of initiatives, especially if they're being given a ton of money to do it. And that money doesn't often trickle down to the local communities, and oftentimes their needs aren't heard, exactly as you said, Aaron. And so we've been working with with a leader in Costa Rica, and I would be delighted to put you in touch with her because she's a really phenomenal advocate, very smart scientist and very smart activist. And she's been active in all the international fora, sort of waving the flag of, to the small scale fishers, don't be co-opted by the big NGOs, and let's make sure that the voices of small scale fishers and local communities are the ones who are actually being listened to first. And I would say that she has the best framework that she's using that I've seen for how to make sure that that protected areas are used as a concept that protects the people first, and also in addition, and instead of being kind of a sort of secret weapon for keeping places off limits. So yeah, I'd be happy to put the two of you in touch. She's an amazing woman. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Weiskel. I think exclusionary concepts like MPAs, and when we talk about these large-scale conservation measures which exclude communities, especially from common resources such as our coastal resources, fisheries, it's something that we need to think about, and how do we tackle these in a rapidly changing global scenario. I think thank you very much, and it was really an informative talk and a very interactive discussion. I think most of the participants have benefited from this particular discussion, and also a very wonderful talk that you gave. Thank you, Dr. Weiskel, for taking out your valuable time and being with us. That's it. I think goodbye to you, and
goodbye.
Nice day.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much to everyone. It was really a pleasure, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be among all of you. And please feel free to follow up via email. I'd be happy to answer any questions, put you in touch with people, and talk about all these important issues further. So thank you for all your good work.
Take care. Bye-bye. Yeah.
You too. Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.